As I said, I waited for an hour on Tuesday at a golf course in Rosebud, not that far out of Melbourne, about 10 minutes from an ambulance, a Micah ambulance station. And we waited an hour while a friend of mine appeared to me and our playing colleagues that he was potentially having a stroke, perhaps a heart attack. He'd already had an open heart surgery. He had an insert into his heart to keep him ticking. So we were very worried. It took an hour for the paramedics to get there. Not their fault. They had to come from Seaford. Brad Batten is the Victorian Shadow Minister for Emergency Services. If you win the election at the end of the year, how are you going to fix this crisis up, Brad?
Oh, good morning, Steve. It's going to be a huge challenge. We already know that, but we've said one of the biggest issues is, number one, the 000 call waiting times, and number two is how do we ensure that we don't have ambulances ramping here in the state. What we've seen so far, and we're probably most disappointed in, is obviously the Andrews Labor government are coming out now talking about a $12 billion health investment. Problem is they committed that in 2018. They actually came out and said they were going to build Maryborough Hospital, Melton Hospital, another hospital down in the Geelong and Barwon area. If those three hospitals were online as promised, that means we probably wouldn't have the ramping issues we have now. It's not the paramedics, it's not the ambulance drivers, it's not anyone that's in the health sector. It's failure from investment. And if we can't see that investment done, then we're going to continue to see this increase in ramping at hospitals across the state. And then circumstances like yours, Steve, where you end up waiting for an hour for an ambulance to come across from Seaford.
I was shocked about that. With us, it ended okay, and our friend recovered. But I made the point in that column at the weekend, Brad, as you'd know, about the 14-year-old Pakenham girl, Lydia Anseline, who's no longer with us. She died in her father's arms, waited 30 minutes for an ambulance after having a serious asthma attack. I mean, seriously, how can a government live with itself when it's got 14-year-old children dying because of ambulance ramping and a lack of facilities and a lack of resources?
Yeah, and it's something the government's known for a long time. It's probably the most disappointing part. We continue to hear about COVID, and we understand COVID had an impact. Nobody said it hasn't. What we're saying, though, is there was a lack of planning and preparing, and we go back to Nick Panagiotis, who passed away waiting for an ambulance in October last year. And it's continued on since then. And families have contacted us, whether it's myself or other people in our party, including David Edwards' family up in Swan Hill, who had to wait. So it's not all located just to one specific geographical area. It's across the whole state, as you said. And that's Pakenham, which is just outside my electorate, where we lost a life again of a 14-year-old girl, Alicia Hussein, who died of asthma. And everybody's heard that footage of when they were on the line and her mother saying, her mother Jasmine saying, "Breathe, Alicia, breathe." If that didn't hit the chords with the government that they have to act and get something done, then nothing will. And I think worse than that is, the Andrews Labor government has said they're looking into this. Daniel Andrews has already openly said he hasn't actually read the new briefing, the new report into what's happening in 000, which will also include what's happening with calls and dispatches from ambulance. If he's not reading it, he's not respecting those families to make sure we can fix the system, because it may not just be money. It may be actually a system error or structure within the ESTA or dispatch that we can actually get ambulances out quicker. Or it may be, as I said before, the ramping because of the lack of investment in hospitals. That could be our biggest issue. Then let's work on that so we can get ambulances out as quick as we can.
How's Martin Foley still got a job? He can't explain it either. He's a health minister, and Daniel Andrews always wants to blame everyone else. He was health minister, and now he's been premier so I think for, the better part of 11 years, he's had control ultimately of health in Victoria. So if there's one person to blame, it's him.
100%. And we've been saying that for a long time, particularly around Daniel Andrews. But Martin Foley, let's not forget, the mental health system here in Victoria, we've all known, and I've spoken about this with you on your show before, is broken. And they did a Royal Commission which said over the last 2 decades, the lack of investment and the system of the mental health system here in Victoria has totally failed. Martin Foley was the mental health minister for 5 years and got promoted to health. And since he's been in health, it has been absolutely and utterly torn apart. Maybe
he's
it's about
useless.
time he does go. He can't continue in that role whilst we're hearing of people dying across our health network. Martin Foley has absolutely and utterly destroyed our system because his failure to acknowledge what's going on. And it's almost like, and I'd never want to say it, it's almost like he doesn't care, because he's another one that's come out and won't confirm he's read the report into what's happening in our health crisis in Victoria. If they're not reading what the problems are and they're putting their head in the sand, that means they're ignoring them. That means we're going to see more deaths here in Victoria between now and the election, and hopefully a change of government so we can start the process to read the report and implement recommendations that ensure we actually get ambulances to people as soon as possible across the state.
I said in the column on Saturday in the Herald Sun, on this policy failure alone, the Daniel Andrews-led Labor government deserves to be thrown out of office.
You know, it's actually interesting, Stephen. There's a whole push against incumbent governments across Australia after COVID. People want to kind of separate a little bit from COVID, and South Australia was an example. But the biggest thing and the biggest impact we've seen on change of governments anywhere in Australia in the last, probably I'm going to say 10 years, is health. When your health system is failing, when people are dying, governments tend to get thrown out because people start to know that impacts them. We all, in some way, vote for ourselves. We all have some selfishness in us. And if you think you're going to be at home and you've got an elderly mother or you've got a father that may have a heart attack, you want to make sure that that ambulance is there as soon as possible. And if you've got a government that's not delivering on that, that is the one thing, that is one item that fundamentally changes votes across the whole state and country. And I think that at the moment, because it is so broken, they can't fix it with the investment they're now committing to in the next 5 years. People are going to see it's broken now and want it fixed. And I think that they'll start to look for a change in that. And then we'll have to come up with the exact policies of how we're going to deliver that. And as I said before, that could be, it's not always just money. It could be system changes. We've got a very structured system in Esther where only ambulance callers can answer calls for ambulance and fire, and police. Yet when the others are quiet, they can't cross over and help out. Maybe we need to look at that to fix that. Get the hospitals built. We've committed to Melton, Maryborough, and down at Geelong. These hospitals should have been built as promised by 2022. We wouldn't have the ramping issue today. That is the government's responsibility, not COVID, failure to build them. They've done their level crossings. Congratulations. But people wanted to make sure hospitals were built and you haven't built them. That is a failure across the state.
And you now need to make sure you can convince the voting public of Victoria that you will do that and that you can be trusted to fix it.
Oh, 100%. And not only that, Steve, when we get there, we have to get on with the job and actually do it. So Matthew Guy's already said, for the Melton Hospital, we will make sure construction starts within that 12-month period because people in Melton have been ignored too long. When you're talking about down here in the Casey area, the Casey Hospital, the staff are amazing, but wait times now, they had 43 people in the last quarter waiting over 24 hours in the emergency department. I don't care if it's a sore toenail, no one should be waiting 24 hours, but that means there's other people waiting 6 and 7 hours with urgent health needs that we're not seeing to. They're putting out reports. People then get frustrated. They say the hospital's bad. It's not the hospital. It's not the staff. It's lack of investment in these areas, in the growth areas across the whole state. Point Cook, out to Werribee, across to Berwick, Pakenham, all these areas, we've got thousands of people moving in. It's harder to drive around because the roads are more congested. People are not catching public transport. Therefore, everything's going to be delayed anyway. So why are we now having an issue where hospitals are so backlogged? We've got ambulances ramped up to 39. We've had more code red and code oranges than any other state. It simply has to come down to government failure in investment and making sure we look at the systems that are delivering these services, not just the people, but the actual systems. Because if they're failing, it may not need a lot of money to get some improvement across the state.
Good to catch up. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
No worries. Thank you. See you later.
Brad Batten there, Victorian Shadow Minister for Emergency Services.